Hello, BookTube. Welcome to a nonfiction review. Back in college, so this is the early 80s, I took courses in nutrition and applied nutrition. So I got the science that was current then. The book that we're going to review today, I read because I needed to bring that science up to date. And in particular, I wanted to understand what our bodies and our brains were doing, how they were interacting with the kind of food that has become an increasing part of the Western diet and the global diet since the 1970s, what we would call ultra-processed food. The book we're looking at today is Ultra-Processed People, written by Dr. Chris van Tulleken. It's 376 pages long, of which 302 are the actual text. This was a library book. I had been looking out for this title for a long time. While I was on my Read What You Own challenge, it was one of the books that tempted me to break my own rules and buy a book when I'd already bought all the books I could. And that's because I've always had an interest in food and human diet. But I find that the more recent science and research that's being done is shedding more light on exactly what our bodies and our brains do with food and why exactly that makes less processed food the better choice for our diets. The book is fairly new. It was published in 2023, so prices are still, you can't get very cheap secondhand copies if that's what you're looking for. You can see what the print versions are. They're £5.49 in the UK and $16.08 in the US. That's for paperback. Hardback obviously is dearer. I read a hardback, but of course I borrowed it from our library, which had got it as a new acquisition. Yay for my library. So it meant I could add to my library pages read, but at the same time, get to know a book whose findings I was interested to learn more about. Chris van Tulleken was born in 1978 in England. He qualified as a physician at St. Peter's College in Oxford. He is also a BBC television and podcast presenter. The latest program, if you are able to catch podcasts from the BBC, The Truth About Food in 2024 covers much of the same ground. So if you are not in the mood right now for a physical book, you prefer to get this kind of information through audio, then I recommend those podcasts. I also recommend his 2024 Royal Institution of Science Christmas lectures. There are two of those. They're on YouTube, and they cover a great deal of the material that I'm going to talk about that comes into this book. So again, another way, perhaps a more easily digestible or approachable way for some of you out there to get this information if you're interested without actually having to purchase the book. But if you do choose to purchase the book, then I have good news. I think as a work of nonfiction, this has been laid out and written in a way that is as friendly as possible to a popular non-academic audience. My hardback copy had 14-point font, Times New Roman, lots of a generous amount of white space surrounding the text, which I always think is important. Somehow that makes reading easier. And the writing style is a magazine journalism. It's got some conversational digressions and asides. There's occasional personal anecdotes that go alongside the factual evidence that naturally has to be part of a book like this. I just think it makes it a very approachable book. There are 20 chapters. They average about 15 pages each. And as far as the content goes, there's no charts or illustrations. And some of you might want that, might want graphs. It isn't that kind of book. There are some acknowledgements. There are a lot of notes in the back. So if you did want to make your reading heavier, if this whetted your appetite, or you have a scientific background and you know that you could take something heavier, then the 50 pages of notes in the back, and there are also footnotes in the text itself. So there is a lot of material that is sort of in addition to the main body of the text. But the main body of the text, I think, is written and structured and put on the page in order to make it as accessible to the general public as possible. Normally, at this point, I do a chapter by chapter summary, I think that would get really long and really tough listening right now. The book divides also into 5 parts. So I'm going to give you really a rough summary of each part because it's so information dense. Even though I've just said it's very approachable, it is, but there's a lot of information going on in there. So let's talk about part 1, which is called Wait, I'm Eating What? And this section makes clear how ultra-processed food should be defined. And Chris van Tulleken introduces you to the NOVA system, which I didn't know. And it divides all food into 4 groups. And just for quick understanding, the NOVA number 1 level is for those unprocessed foods like fish, meat, fruit, vegetables, but also things like flour and simple combinations of those ingredients like you get in homemade pasta. And then you've got a 2 level, which is for culinary ingredients, which they do need some processing to be available, like oil, vinegar, butter, salt, sugar. Then you've got Nova 3. Now, Nova 3 is processed food. However, it's processed food where the aim is mainly to preserve the food. So that includes most tinned vegetables, fruits, canned beans, and homemade bread, which is a processed food, but with ingredients that you can get from a supermarket and you would find in the average household kitchen. What Chris van Tulleken is dealing with mainly in this book is Nova Level 4. And that is those foods which really did not exist before the Second World War. It was after the Second World War that we began to see what is defined as, and I'm reading the definition out loud now, formulations of ingredients, most of exclusive industrial use, made by a series of industrial processes, many requiring sophisticated equipment and technology. And a great part of our diet now is actually foods made up of mainly those ingredients, or a small amount of unprocessed food with highly processed ingredients added. Chris van Tulleken put himself on a diet of 80% NOVA Category 4 ultra-processed food. And he did this at the same time he went and he met industry experts, insiders who explained the origin of many of the industry's ingredients, like modified starches and fats, the sweeteners, the flavorings, the emulsifiers. We've read them on the back of packets, but maybe we don't know exactly what they're made of and exactly what our body does with them, how it can or cannot handle them. And the combination of learning what he was actually eating and the symptoms he began to notice as he carried on with this highly ultra-processed food diet, that was what made him able to break a cycle of addiction that he found in himself. And I understand that his brother was also able to break an addictive behavior around this kind of ultra-processed food. Part 2 is called, But Can't I Just Control What I Eat? And this was I think the most encouraging, because I know for a lot of people reading these kind of books, they have negative connotations, don't they? That you immediately feel bad about yourself because we all eat some of this. Most of us struggle to one degree or another with our weight, or we really, really have to work to keep our weight where it is. One way or another, the whole subject of food is wrought and fraught. And van Tulleken himself, in the Royal Institute Christmas lectures, says that he's most sensitive about the reaction that might be had from people who might be susceptible to different kinds of eating disorders, like bulimia and anorexia nervosa. He wants people to understand what their bodies can and can't do with these substances in detail, so that people can at least understand why maybe some of our disordered eating behavior might be caused by these foods, because our brains and our bodies don't know how to handle them, are making incorrect decisions and giving us incorrect instructions when they receive those ingredients. So van Tulleken divides the history of the human diet into parts. He talks about how the earliest humans had larger jaws, harder skulls, and therefore smaller skulls. And the reason we needed that structure in our face was because we had to allow for the digestion of raw meat, lots of raw fruit and vegetables. And so that meant more teeth, larger jaws. Then when humans discovered fire and the ability to cook, but also to dry, to grind, to cure, and to ferment food, this meant that the nutrients in food were now easier to digest. And that, he said, is the main reason why our whole head structure changed. Our jaw was able to recede. We needed further teeth. Our skull could be softer, and that could accommodate a larger brain. And then that continued to be the situation with the human diet. That was the level of processing up until round about the end of the 19th, early 20th centuries. And then we began to see the first types of processing for other means. But really, he's also pointing to after the Second World War, when we were able to invent ingredients that had calorific value, but no nutrients, or a taste or a smell that was attractive, but no calorific value and no nutrients. And he goes on to explain in great detail, quoting some studies, and I'm going to share a couple of these, how our digestive system is very finely tuned and equipped to feed us what we need. It's used to dealing with the unprocessed food ingredients. It knows exactly what to do with them, exactly how to extract the nutrients it needs from those, and exactly what signals to give us to say, that's enough, or I need a little bit more of this nutrient, so I'm going to steer you in the direction of a particular food that I know from experience will give me that our bodies have that kind of knowledge and that kind of ability to feed us well. Section 3 is entitled, "Oh, so this is why I'm anxious and my belly aches." And this section goes into detail. Exactly how do ultra-processed ingredients undermine our body and our brain's natural ability to regulate our diet? The texture, flavors, and aromas of ultra-processed food, they send incorrect signals to our brains, signals that seem to promise that we will get desirable, high-quality nutrients, but what the body actually receives contradicts that signal. And van Telleken proposes that it's these false signals and the resulting lack that may set up cycles of addictive or compulsive behavior, with our bodies and our brains driving us to eat more or less ultra-processed calories in a desperate search to get in control or to get nutrients that aren't actually there in what we're eating. Section 4, "But I already paid for this." That was the toughest section to read because it detailed the economic and the environmental impact of the global system of growing, shipping, processing, packaging, and redistributing ultra-processed food. The statistics were very alarming. I got to tell you that. I think anyone's response to reading Section 4 would be to wish all ultra-processing would stop. But our food distribution systems are such an interdependent matrix now that any great change would be dangerous, and van Telleken stresses this. He also stresses that it would create dangerous fluctuations in food supply, and he wants to stress the fact that in many countries, the ultra-processed food is the only affordable food to those on lower incomes. And as you might already be guessing, Section 5, what the hell am I supposed to do then? It's interesting for what it does not ask us to do. It does not ask readers, individual readers, to be the solution to the problem. I think it leaves it open. It is not a book that pressures anybody to change their diet. It simply presents you with the information, tells you what what problems it's causing and where the best solutions might come from. But it really doesn't put pressure on you, because van Tulleken stressed this in his lectures. He knows for some people, this isn't a choice. For some people on certain incomes, this is not a choice. And for my rabbit hole today, I want to read from van Tulleken's book a couple of the research studies which discovered things that I certainly never learned in the early 80s when I was studying nutrition. New findings about how the body regulates itself. It's really quite astonishing. So allow me to read you a couple of sections. So here we are. Here's my copy. And I'm going to be reading from page 129 of the hardback edition. To understand how exercise and activity affect our body weight, we need to turn to the work of Herman Pontzer. He's an associate professor of evolutionary anthropology at Duke University, whose research is transforming how we think about diet and metabolism. Ponser wanted to work out the difference in daily calorific expenditure between hunter-gatherers, farmers, and sedentary office workers. To do it, he spent time with the Hadza, a population of hunter-gatherers living in savanna woodland in northern Tanzania. The Hadza hunt and gather food on foot with bows, small axes, and digging sticks. Men hunt game and gather honey, women gather plants. Wild foods, including tubers, berries, small and large game, honey, and fruit, provide 95% of the Hadza's calories. Ponser measured the total daily energy expenditure over 11 days in 30 adults. His team used the doubly labeled water method and a portable respirometry system whereby the participant wears a hood device that measures how much oxygen they consume and how much carbon dioxide they produce. The team also gave participants GPS devices to gather accurate travel data. The results were so surprising that the team recalculated them again and again in many different ways and controlling for different factors, convinced that they had to be wrong. Because very much contrary to expectations, the number of calories the Hadza adults burn was found to be very similar to that of American and European populations. Even breastfeeding or being pregnant made no difference. In fact, these results are supported by other studies. Amy Luke and Kara Ebersole of Loyola University showed that there was no difference in the total energy expenditure between a cohort of women in rural Nigeria and another in suburban Chicago. In fact, this pattern holds true for all human populations ever studied, and the same thing has been reported in non-human primates. Captive populations burn the same number of calories as their counterparts in the wild. And the other study, it might be better for me to part explain and part read from the book. There was a pediatrician in the 1920s living in Chicago called Clara Davies. Now, she was disturbed by the kind of literature that was being marketed to parents of young children about what they should do about feeding children, because it was very aggressive and it seemed to suggest to parents that they should force children to eat what was good for them rather than allowing the child to have any choice in that matter. And so she set up a very interesting experiment. Now, the difficult thing about it was it tended to involve the children of mothers who weren't very well off. And what they did was they offered the mothers the chance to have their children live for several months in a confined space where all their movement and their eating could be completely controlled. The children were 9 months old, so in most cases they had not been weaned. The researchers tried to get children that were being breastfed, even though some of those children weren't being effectively nourished by that breast milk because their mothers were malnourished. But what Clara Davies did was allow these children to feed themselves. They were presented with individual ingredients in small dishes every day at set times. They were supervised by a team of nurses, but that team of nurses was under strict instructions not to give the child anything to eat, not to feed the child, but only to assist the child if, because they were that young, they struggled to pick something up to feed themselves. But it had to be clear that the child had chosen what it wanted to eat before the nurse could assist them in eating it. And what they found, and I'm going to focus in on one particular child whose surname was Rutherford. He came to the clinic already showing visible signs of rickets, of a vitamin D deficiency. When he was allowed to choose from the ingredients on this table at mealtimes, one of the ingredients was the only edible source of vitamin D. It was a small cup of cod liver oil. Now, I don't know, those of you out there who have small children, how many of you have ever seen them voluntarily? And I think most small children would not eat it. And the truth was, most of the children in that study did not consume any of the cod liver oil. However, young Rutherford, a 9-month-old boy with visible symptoms of rickets, chose to drink the cod liver oil for several weeks. And once the symptoms of his deficiency cleared up, he stopped drinking the cod liver oil and never wanted it again. And what the nurses found was that the children, because they could measure exactly what each child ate and exactly what the nutrient content was, they concluded after the end of the study that the children were in fact feeding themselves a balanced diet containing all the nutrients they needed, and if they were, as in Rutherford's case, short of a particular nutrient, they tended to focus on one particular food that was rich in that nutrient until they had restored the nutrient balance in their bodies. So you can see how those two studies, and there are many more detailed within the book, show that our bodies are set up and our brains do seem to be set up to understand what to do with unprocessed food ingredients, and would, if we could follow their promptings, guide us to eat correctly. But of course, again, I want to stress the point Van Tulleken makes frequently in his book and in the Royal Institute lectures, that he does not want anyone to feel guilty about eating ultra-processed food, because in our present day economic system, the cost of unprocessed ingredients is prohibitive for a lot of income groups. Many people are not able to afford them, and many people do not have the additional time or energy, because of course it takes energy, to turn unprocessed ingredients into meals. And I think this is why part 5 of the book, the last part, does not stress that individuals should be the solution to this problem of ultra-processed food. He did mention one woman whom I knew, a woman who lived as a single mother on benefits and low-paying work, and yet she developed a number of simple recipes to feed herself with the best quality ingredients that she could afford. Her name is Jack Munroe, and I own one of her cookbooks called A Year in 120 Recipes, which emphasizes how you can eat seasonally while eating relatively cheaply. But her first book, her very first cookbook, was entitled A Girl Named Jack. I don't often do recommended reading, but I think for this one I will, because I admire Jack Munroe's ideas for recipes. They seem to me to be workable on a very low budget, and also for feeding children, because she was feeding a small child at the time. So I recommend that for anyone who wishes they could make some adjustments to their diet, but they're looking at their bank balance and thinking, this is not going to be easy. I'd also like to make everybody aware that Ultra Processed People is available in translation in Italian and Spanish and German. And that is the review done. I have the day off tomorrow. Today's Sunday, so I get Monday off, which is kind of exciting. Haven't had a day off in a while. And I'm hoping, because I have just finished reading Fanny Flagg's book, Welcome to the World, Baby Girl, and it blew me away. It really did. But I think it's a really good example of representation handled well, handled in a way that feels organic and natural to the story, and not inserted or worked in the way I was talking about in Tag Video. Didactic in a way that doesn't seem didactic, if that makes any sense. Well, it will if you watch the review, because I'm going to cover that. Look forward to that. That's what's coming out midweek. It's February, everybody. It's February, new reading goals and all that stuff. I am doing amazingly well with the page count thing. I'm not going to talk too much about it now. I'll find a way to fit that in some sort of newsy video that appears this month. You all, good luck with your reading goals, whatever they are, and I'll see you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.